Is it possible for an individual to have too much sex?
Absolutely it is. And in fact, first we found this out in animal studies, and then we have subsequently found it out in human studies. But the interesting thing is when you drop a receptive female rat into a male rat's cage, first you'll see a frenzy of copulation, but eventually that male rat tires of that particular female. Even if she wants more, he has had enough. But then drop in a new female, and then you see that same frenzy of copulation. We call that the Coolidge effect, and it's the automatic response to what we call novel mates. And it is actually what sets up the pornography pathway, which reveals and results in some very adverse brain changes.
Let's talk about those adverse brain changes. So, too much sex and the pathway to the pornography, or the pathway of pornography opening up, what happens? What's happening in the brain? What are some of those brain changes that are going on?
Yes, it's the what we call the supernormal stimuli. So, an intimate sexual act as a part of marriage on occasion is actually a healthy thing. But when it's not part of intimacy, and when it's a super normal type of act where it's not just a natural part but more stimulating than that, or if it's too frequent, it will produce 3 definite adverse brain changes. The first one is more pleasure actually leads to less pleasure. And so as this supernormal stimuli take hold, the person is not able to experience the pleasure that he or she once was. And this is one of the reasons why marriages after about 3.5 years or 4 years go from the euphoric stage to the non-euphoric stage. If people understood this topic of sex and mental health, they would be able to stay in the euphoria stage throughout life in the vast majority of cases. But because of the tendency of overdoing it, they actually drive themselves into less pleasure. And then there is a super normal, or I should say a super memory of the pleasurable events, driving down what we call D2 receptors or dopamine receptors. Mm-hmm. And the individual actually has an increase in anxiety as a result. The usual nuisances of life become far more irritable to the person in this stage. And both anxiety levels and also occasionally depression levels can go up. And then the third change, we call that desensitization, by the way. The first one is called sensitization, and then there's desensitization.
Okay.
And then the third change is what we call hypofrontality. This is where your frontal lobe actually shrinks, and the gray matter starts to shrink down in the frontal lobe of the brain, and that makes the brain unable to foresee consequences as well. So a marked diminished ability to foresee consequences. Empathy goes down in these individuals significantly, and then they're prone to relapse into a previous addiction in response to stress. And these are very common changes that take place in a large segment of humanity because of their misunderstanding of this topic.